guess my hope is that the novel will encourage, Canadians and others to sort of take a second look at the humanity of these people that are either here with us already but can't get their lives going, or are trying to get in and are in desperate situations. And I think if we can see and imagine and feel their humanity as being equal to ours, then we're more likely to act like world citizens and act with conscience and step up.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Yvonne Hunter, and I'm the head of programming here at the Appel Salon at the Toronto Public Library. Hello. It is my great pleasure to welcome to the stage tonight a writer that I have known for close to 15 years, with a novel described by the Globe and Mail this past weekend as probably the most anticipated Canadian novel of the year. With a plot ripped from the headlines, The Illegal is a condemnation of the plight of refugees. It's much, much more. I'm thrilled to welcome Lawrence Hill to the Appel Salon in conversation with CTV's Marci. Lawrence Hill is the author of 10 books, including his 2007 novel, The Book of Negroes, a book described by his publisher, Iris Tupholme, who's in the audience with us this evening, as HarperCollins' best-selling novel in Canada in the history of the company. This kind of success is incredibly rare in publishing, as Iris noted in the Globe feature on Saturday. There are maybe a handful of Canadian writers who've ever reached the level of readership here that Larry has. Published, as I mentioned, in 2007, The Book of Negroes is still on the Globe and Mail bestsellers list, after winning the Rogers Fictions Trust Writers' Prize, the Commonwealth Writers' Prize for Best Book, and both CBC's Radio's Canada Reads and Combat des Livres. It was reviewed by the Globe as a masterpiece, daring and impressive in its geographic, historical, and human reach, convincing in its narrative art and detail, necessary for imagining the real beyond the traces left by history. Of course, all of you know it was recently made into a CBC television movie. And today, Larry is going to speak to us about The Illegal, which is his first novel since The Book of Negroes. Before we begin, tonight's event ushers in a spectacular fall season at the Salon. Next week, we welcome Sweden's David Lagercrantz, author of The Girl in the Spider's Web, which is the sequel to Stieg Larsson's Millennium Trilogy. And the following week, First Nations broadcaster and activist Wab Kiinu joins us. Then, New York Times bestselling graphic novelist Kate Beaton, followed by Margaret Atwood, Salman Rushdie, Jonathan Franzen, John and Irving, Janet Ivanovich, Ian Rankin, Michael Connolly, and many more. Our publications are at the back of the room, so I encourage you to pick up copies. And if you're looking to get tickets, our tickets become available at 9 o'clock in the morning, 4 weeks before the event. They're starting to sell out sometimes within minutes. So I encourage you to check our website frequently. We try to accommodate 600 people in here, which is as many as we can fit in the salon in one evening. If you're on Twitter, we invite you to follow us at Toronto Library and join the conversation with the hashtag Appel Salon. After tonight's Q&A, Larry will be signing his book at the very back of the room. Copies are available for purchase courtesy of Ben McNally Books. Ben's seated at the book selling table just over at the side by the bar. I want to say a little bit about Marci Ian. Marci is a mom of two, a basketball fan, and she, after becoming the show's news anchor for 10 years at CTV, became the co-host of Canada AM. In 2010, she was the recipient of the Black Business and Professional Association's Women of Honor Award. She has interviewed newsmakers including Desmond Tutu on the future of South Africa, Deepak Chopra on finding one's true authentic self, and Jamie Foxx on his rags to riches story and achieving balance in Hollywood. Most recently on this stage, she interviewed Governor General's Award winner Thomas King. She is one of the warmest, most congenial television hosts in the country, an avid reader, and a great friend of the library. Please join me in welcoming Marci Ian and Lawrence Hill.
Well, hello. Look at this crowd, Lawrence. Look what you did.
Unbelievable.
Look what you did. I had to bring this bag up here because I have all sorts of quotes and things I want to pull out of this fantastic book that kept me up at night. It's so darn good. It is fantastic. A lot of people have been waiting for this, Lawrence. A lot of people have. What have you been up to these past years?
My very patient editor, Iris Tupholm's, especially been waiting for it, as it's only about 3 years late, but we won't talk about that today.
So Yvonne had mentioned that it is so topical because The Illegal is a refugee story. And Lawrence and I were speaking a little bit earlier in the green room, and I said, you know, I cover news every day, and we're seeing in Europe right now various stories. But really, I felt that nobody paid attention to those stories until we saw a 3-year-old boy named Milan wash up on the shores of Turkey, Syrian boy, in his leather shoes and his perfect haircut and his clothes, and the world took note and said, okay, refugees have a face, they have a story, they have a life, and this is it.
And they could be me or they could be my child.
They could be me or they could be my child. The Illegal focuses on Keita, a so-called illegal. Tell us a little bit about your main character.
Well, his name is Keita Ali, and he's actually the son of a character who's run through 2 earlier novels of mine. My first novel, Some Great Thing, and the second novel, In the Known Blood, had a minor character in both novels called Yo-Yo Ali, and he's a journalist from Cameroon who's living in Winnipeg or in Baltimore, depending on the novel. But Keita Ali is a son of Yo-Yo, and he's from a country that's going through a lot of upheaval. We can get into that, and he has to flee that country. He has to flee the violence in that country, and he comes as an undocumented refugee into a new land where he's not welcome. So he's a lot of things, but he's a son and a brother and an elite runner, and he's an undocumented refugee living in a nation that's determined to ferret him out and deport him.
Ironically enough, Freedom State is where he lands, and I thought, how ironic it's called Freedom State and not so free.
Yeah, well, a couple of years ago I went on a book tour with the Book of Negroes to France as it was translated and brought out in French. Miranda and I went to Paris, and in the time that I was in Paris touring with the French translation of the Book of Negroes, there were, the first run of presidential elections were going on in France, and the Front National won 17% of the popular vote in that first presidential vote. 17% of the popular vote of France going to a far-right party that's devoted to getting rid of immigrants and refugees. It was a staggering percentage of the popular vote, and so it was a pretty sobering statistic. And it just so happened that we were there, so I was reading the French papers when we were there, so it was been on my mind, this idea of a nation that could really become one of the most powerful nations of the world, could become openly hateful to the very idea of refugees in their land.
I want to get back to Keita for a moment and this idea of running, because he has aspirations to run for his country. His whole being is about winning in the Olympics and running and doing this and making his family proud and his country proud.
Well, Keita comes from this country called Zantoroland, the entire geography of this novel is made up. The country that he flees and the country that he comes to. He flees his native country called Zantoroland, which is a tiny island, a mountainous island in the Indian Ocean, which is witnessing rising but internationally unrecognized genocide against a certain ethnic group of which he's a member. And it's one of the very poorest countries in the world, and it has the dubious distinction of producing the fastest marathoners in the world. So Keita is from a marathoning nation that venerates its elite athletes. Its elite athletes might win the first 6 spots in the Boston Marathon. They totally dominate the world marathoning community, and so he's from this country. And he's not the fastest runner from Zantoroland, but he's in the top 6. And he has to flee. And so he takes his legs with him, and he uses those legs to stay alive in Freedom State. He's on the run. He's not running for Olympic glory. He's running to flee, being caught and deported to a certain death if he's caught and deported. He's running to make money because he enters local road races and scoops up the meager pots that are offered if you win a local road race in this country, Freedom State. And he's running to put together money to try to help his sister who's been kidnapped, and he's got to put together a ransom to try to pay her ransom.
Okay, so hold that thought for a second. And a couple of months ago, Lawrence did an interview with Active Life magazine. I came across it, and there's just a little paragraph that I want to read, okay? And the reporter says to Lawrence, he wants to talk about his youth and the lessons that he learned. And so one of the hardest lessons he'll learn when he was young was that the philosophical nugget, you can achieve anything you set your mind to, is in reality not true. And here's the quote from Lawrence. He says, "When I was a child, I dreamt of Olympic glory. I trained like a maniac. I ran and ran and ran every day through snow, ice, rain, and the blazing heat. But there's some things you cannot achieve even though you try and train as hard as you can. You can give it your best shot, but then you have to adjust and mature around the realization that you won't always reach your goals. I took that passion for running and transferred it to writing, which worked out for me." Did you realize those dreams through Keita?
Well, I sure did realize it through Keita. He sure runs a lot faster than I did. He's a 2:07 marathoner, so he's an amazing runner. Although I was never an elite runner, I did train with far behind a number of elite runners, and I've watched them train, and I've trained with them, and we've hung out for years. I ran with a guy who set the Canadian record in the Montreal Olympics in the 1,500 meters, and that record stood for about 20 years, Paul Craig, and I ran far behind Paul. And I ran with a guy named Brian Maxwell, who was one of the fastest marathoners in the world in his day, and many other phenomenal runners. So I got to witness amazing runners, even though I wasn't one of them. And there's something of real beauty about running. And Matt Galloway and I were just talking about running this morning, and we both said that when we arrive somewhere, the first thing we want to do is run on that land, so we feel we can kind of tame that land and own it and feel part of it. Running for a runner is kind of a way of owning the space that you're occupying physically, of getting to know it intimately. And so you see a hill and you think, I want to run up that hill, because it's a way of getting to know that space. Or you arrive in a foreign city or a foreign country, you want to go for a run because it's a beautiful way to kind of really feel the place. And so that's defined, even though I wasn't a good runner in terms of winning races, it certainly, for me, it was 45 years of sort of discovering places by running through them.
So Keita is in Freedom State and ends up in this area called Africtown. I lived in Halifax for quite a while at the beginning of my career with CTV back in the 90s, and Africville reminds me a lot of Africtown. Tell me about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, probably everybody in this room has heard of Africville, but Africville was part of the community in the north part of Halifax, and the first people who settled in Africville were arriving after the War of 1812. So the first inhabitants of Africville are arriving in the early to mid 1800s. But then in the 20th century, especially between the wars and after the Second World War, the population of Africville in Halifax really starts to grow, and it was sort of despised by civic leaders. On one hand, there was a really community there, and people lived there and ate and drank, and there was a community for sure. On the other hand, a dump was there, and there wasn't proper sewage, and the city refused to provide proper service to Africville. That made me think of what happens in Africtown. And it was despised by the people who ruled the city, and finally they bulldozed it over the course of about 3 years in the late 1960s. And I should add that in the very same time that Africville was being bulldozed in the late 1960s. Two other black communities were being bulldozed, Hogan's Alley in Vancouver, and also District 6 in Cape Town. And District 6 was a so-called colored district of colored people under the apartheid regime, and it was also bulldozed at the same time by the authorities in Cape Town, who didn't want this vibrant, colored community to exist, and so they bulldozed it. So these three went down at the same time, really. Mm-hmm. And so Africtown in the novel is also at risk of being bulldozed by the authorities of Freedom State.
But there is the queen of Africtown.
The queen.
Lula. This character, and how you write female characters, Amanat, oh my gosh. But how you write female characters so well. I think how is it even possible? But where did Lula come from? Because she is just a ball of fire.
Well, I'm not sure exactly. She's definitely not a fictional character that's close to somebody I've known. So it's not that I know somebody who's quite like Lula. But to answer that question, I have to say that I have to step back a bit and say that what I was really thinking of in terms of Africtown, which is Lula is a self-proclaimed queen of Africtown. You can't get anything, a place to live, a job, food, anything without Lula's say-so in the novel. But I spent some time in the townships in South Africa, and if you travel through those townships, you see this amazing mix of, on one hand, incredible deprivation, and on the other hand, really vibrant communities. You have HIV clinics and schools and people fighting to sort of do things to help each other out, and at the same time, there might be a stretch of 200 houses sharing the same single water pipe, with no proper sewage or anything like that, or open sewage and gutters, and often houses without electricity, and those corrugated tin roofs that just bake in the sun in South Africa. And if you drive from, say, the Cape Town airport to Cape Town, you pass kilometers and kilometers of say, Khayelitsha Township with tens of thousands of people living like this. So that's the world that I was imagining that Lula reigns, and in that world are shipping containers, and that's how thousands of people live, in shipping containers, painted purple and pink and orange and yellow, and you might have 10 or 20 people living in a shipping container, and that's the reality of a place like say one of the townships in South Africa. So I was thinking about that, and that's Lula's home turf. And she's a woman who's who fights for her community. She's indignant, and she leads demonstrations. She wants electricity to be installed, and she wants running water, and she provides housing to her people, and so she fights for her community. But on the other hand, she's thoroughly corrupt, and I don't want to say too much about what she does, but she is not a nice person in another part of her life. And without saying exactly what she does to sort of ruin the story for you, she has a really vicious side. And I was quite interested in the person who is this community activism on one hand, who's a nasty character on the other. And so she's a tough character to write. She was as tough as writing Solomon Lindo in the Book of Negroes, who's this Jewish slave owner who on one hand is a slave owner. That sort of says enough, but on the other hand, he's much more respectful of Aminata than the other slave owner that she had, and he was a tough guy to write. And Lula was also a tricky character to sort of get right, but I did have a lot of fun with her, and she's meant to be a very lively character.
Oh, and she is. She most definitely is. Living in one of those containers in Africtown is John. Student journalist. He's brilliant, comes from the wrong side of the tracks, but his brilliance gets him far. He's going to one of the best schools in Freedom State. He is there on full scholarship, but he's on his own. And Lula takes care of him. And so he has a place to live, and he's got food, and he's got clothing and everything else.
But she owns him.
But she owns him. She owns him. He's working for her before he goes to school and everything else. Absent, though, is his mom. And his mom is absent because she is in and out of psychiatric hospitals, and this is stated. And because I know you a little bit, I thought, okay, this is a slice of life here. This is a slice of life.
Well, my brother and sister and I had to face that a little bit in our childhood too, and I had a sense of just, how lonely it was, to not have your mom around for sometimes. And thankfully my mom's still here and very prominently in my life and is in the audience tonight. But occasionally,
Hi, Mom.
Hey, Mom. But occasionally, she was away ill, and so Dan and Karen and I had to kind of cope with that, and it was difficult. So I was really able to put my heart into John, who's a 15-year-old wonderkind. I mean, he's a boy genius, but he doesn't have an active mom. She's in the hospital, and he can't handle visiting her anymore because it's just too painful. So he's just hiding out in Africtown and putting together a documentary and about his people, about Africtown, about life there, and he's trying to vault himself out of Africtown and into this private school where he can stay and live. And he's desperate to prove himself. He's a mixed race boy living in a black community, and he's trying to prove his blackness and prove himself by putting together this documentary about his people living in Africtown, and about the exploitation of all the undocumented refugees, who live there, who on one hand the government would like to deport, but who on the other hand are cleaning people's houses and sleeping with them in the brothel and providing every manner of service, to people in Freedom State, or Freedom Statonians as they're called in the novel. So John is a really great vehicle because he's a very enterprising young journalist. He's trying to put together this documentary, so he's got to be everywhere, and having to be everywhere as a 15-year-old boy is a great way to sort of introduce the reader to all the different parts of the story.
And tell me more about that, the journalists that you use in your writing, because they are a conduit to other places, aren't they? Yo-Yo, the father is a journalist, John is a student journalist.
And the protagonist of my first novel was a journalist too. His name was Mahatma Grafton. And
he's in this too.
He shows up briefly.
He shows up.
Yes.
He's got a mention in this one.
He has a little cameo. Well, a journalist is a great character because a journalist has to be everywhere, and so it's the job of the journalist to move through the world and then move through the story. So it's a wonderful device if you can create the right character in the right moment. And so I have used a journalist before, and I'm happy to give two journalists to this. John is a boy journalist. He's a boy trying to make a documentary and trying to turn himself into a journalist, which he does. And then there's another journalist, a black woman who's gay and who's also in a wheelchair. So she's got three minority statuses. Her name is Viola Hill.
She's a tour de force.
And she's a journalist too, who's out to capture Keita's story and to vault herself off the sports pages and prove herself as a news journalist.
Tell me about, Lawrence, the research that went into this, because there's historical research there, although these are fictional places. There even research into the use of firearms, because I thought, boy, and we won't say too much about that, but it's very, very interesting how, a pistol was held, the description of it. All of these different things, that takes a lot of work, and it takes someone that is particular about these things.
Well, and of course, I used to be a journalist, so I guess I have an eye for that.
Once a journalist, always a journalist.
It's true. Well, sometimes, you just need a little fact, and it'd be almost murder to get that fact out of a book. But if you can just go to the right expert, you can get it. And I needed to know what kind of pistol could shoot off a person's fingertip and not take the whole hand with it, just the fingertip. And so I talked to a ballistics expert, and he told me, what kind of pistol it would be that could actually, because I wanted this character to lose a fingertip but no more. I didn't want the whole hand gone. And so occasionally it just means talking to the right person about the right subject. I have a long connection through my mother and father, and then through my own life with the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. So I talked to some wonderful people there about, what are some of the worst kind of refugee policies in place in Canada, but around the world too, that I could borrow from if I wanted to create a dystopia of a government that's just out to out for blood, just wants to get rid of refugees. What would it be doing? What are some of the worst things that countries are doing? So I talked to some people about that. And there's another, a lawyer who specializes in refugee issues at the U of T. Her name is Audrey Macklin, and I talked many times with Audrey, who was wonderfully helpful, just to get a sense of, to understand, even to supplement my own reading about some of the worst things that governments are doing or might be doing if they really want to be vicious. And so sometimes just going to an expert can save you a lot of time. The lead character has some medical issues, serious medical issues, and he's a refugee. And I thought that was important. Like, a lot of refugees, including the ones we're watching on TV, in addition to walking for hundreds of miles or longer through Europe, some of them might be, missing their insulin or carrying broken bones or having serious health problems that they can't attend to because they're on the run as refugees. And so I was interested in Keita not just being an elite runner, but having a medical issue that he's having trouble getting, attention for. So I talked to some medical specialists about his problem to make sure I got that right, and did some reading about that. So there were lots of bits of research here and there, but on the other hand, because it's a novel that's made up in two countries that I made up, I was able to be free and to kind of create a world that just seemed right to me and didn't have to hinge on research. And I was happy to kind of bust out of the intense, intimate, restrictive obligations of writing a historical fiction and just to write freely and with imagination about a world that I was making up and not have to sort of tell the reader, well, this is how it works in Canada, or this is supposed to be Australia. I just wanted to create a world that seemed right to me, even though it didn't reflect a specific nation in this world.
Although you kept a Tim Hortons in there.
I did keep a Tim Hortons in there.
I love that. I love that one. Tim Hortons. Ivernia Beach. Tell me about the spirited senior who is just something else.
I have to thank my mom for this. Thanks, Mom. Because Ivernia Beach would never have happened if I didn't have my mom. And it's funny because I've written various characters in my life that in one way or another resembled my father. My late father's name was Daniel Hill. But this was the first time I'd taken a run at a character that bared a certain resemblance to my mother. And the circumstances of her life are different, but the personality is there. And so it was really kind of a great experience for me to share that, with my mom and to kind of write it for her. And but Ivernia Beach is, an 85-year-old woman who's in a lot of trouble in the beginning of the novel because she's caused a car accident, and in this dystopia in which we find ourselves in Freedom State, if you're 85 years old and you cause a big car accident, you not only can lose your license and be fined and all that, but you can also lose your right to live independently. The Office for Independent Living can revoke your independence and force you into facilities and
take your assets,
yeah. Seize your assets, manage them for you. So she's fighting a rearguard action, against the state and against her son, who are trying to seize her assets and control her life. And she's not ready to give up control. She's 85 years old and she doesn't want to give up her independence. And so she's in the fight for her life. And so she meets Keita, and they sort of have a lot to give to each other. Their circumstances are different, but they each have really grave problems.
I'm whipping through the book. I've marked up this book. You should see this, ladies and gentlemen.
That.
Oh, I have. I've marked it up. But there's something here, and this is just Ivernia saying she becomes a librarian and is responsible for giving out library cards. And you have to have proper documentation and be basically a person that is allowed to live there, legally living in Freedom State in order to get a library card. And she says, you know what, that's hooey, and starts giving them to everybody and making up addresses and all sorts of things. She is a spitfire. But she talks here about, and I thought, boy, this is the refugee crisis in Europe, and it's unbelievable. But here's just a line here. The newspapers were full of stories about the hardships faced by refugees. Just last week, Ivernia had read about the fate of passengers on another 2 ships, leaky bathtubs really, crammed to the gunwales with refugees in international waters just off the coast. The Coast Guard had blocked them from entering the waters of Freedom State and forced them to turn around and head back to Zantoro land. There were 300 people in the 2 boats, which had been at sea for a month. 13 had died of dehydration or cholera. When the refugees arrived back in Santoraland, a riot broke out and police moved in. 6 more men died. And she's just up in arms against her own government.
She is. And I have to tell you, you were mentioning about this woman giving out library cards. I'd forgotten this. That scene, I imagine, right here in the Toronto Reference Library.
Did you?
No kidding. And let me tell you about that. No kidding, and I'm going to prove it. In case you think I'm just making this up, if you go downstairs and you look at the bank of computers, when you come in the door, sort of a little bit on your right, there's a big bank of computers, and they're on a bit of a slope. And I've been in there many times, myself, because I live in Hamilton, and sometimes I would need to get on a computer or something. And I've often sat in there and wondered, like, if you were a refugee and you had no papers and you were hidden and you were stateless, you were an undocumented refugee, would you be able to get a library card? What would it be like? Are any of these people stateless sitting among me? And when I was imagining Keita in the library, and there are some library scenes, there is a key library scene in this novel, I was imagining him sitting in the Toronto Reference Library in that very area where you see all those computers, where all sorts of people come up from the streets. And so I was imagining the Reference Library computer section on the main floor there when I was writing that scene about Keita meeting Avernier, who's handing out bogus library cards.
You have a great love for libraries.
I do. I couldn't have written a single book without libraries, and it feels like I spent half my life either in the Toronto Public Library or at the Robarts Library at the U of T. And I grew up in Don Mills, with my mom and dad and brother and sister, and there was a Don Mills Public Library. There was also a bookmobile. It was so exciting when the bookmobile would come by our house. But I'd go to the Don Mills Public Library, and I remember having this incredible anxiety as I walked in, because I thought, so I'm supposed to read all these books? And I felt that was what you were supposed to do. If you're going to the library, you had to read everything. I tried, but I couldn't quite get there. But at the time that I started going, I just loved the Henry Huggins books, and I would just eat those books up. And Henry had a dog called Ribsy,
Of course.
And I just used to love to come to the Don Mills Public Library and read those books. So I've really been in love with libraries since I was a child. But as a novelist, I'm in there all the time, and I couldn't write a book without libraries. So hats off to libraries.
There you go. There you go. Your books have been such a gift, but here's the thing that I love about you. You give a lot back. You do. And you've got a couple of programs going, one that involves inmates. And for those that may not know about it, I want you to tell us about that and how soon are you getting there to give them this one?
Oh, I'd love to. Well, I have a couple things that I've been doing, as a citizen. My longest standing, volunteer involvement has been for 35 or so years with Crossroads International, which is a small but very reputable 50-year-old Canadian NGO that serves to develop programs with partners in Bolivia and sub-Saharan Africa to serve the lives of girls and women, creating all sorts of grassroots community economic development projects for girls and women. And that I've been involved with Crossroads now since 1979, and have traveled 4 times to Africa as a volunteer, but also helped here as much as I could as an honorary patron. But another thing that's really enriched my life over the last 5 or 6 years has been to be a volunteer with book clubs for inmates. And Book Clubs for Inmates is another nonprofit organization based in Toronto that sets up book clubs in prisons, in federal penitentiaries. And so I've been, 10 or so times in the federal penitentiaries to meet with inmates. I mean, novels aren't just for lawyers and doctors and judges. Novels are for people in prison too. Novels are for people who really need them. Novels are for people who are down and out and can lose themselves in those books. And some of the most attentive audiences I've ever had have been in federal penitentiaries, where inmates were just so grateful to meet and to spend a few hours together and to talk about literature and not be interrogated about what they did or how they got there, but just to talk about the character in the book that moved them on page 401. And I've just loved going into visit with inmates, and I've visited prisons, male inmates, and I've visited prisons for women, and it's been really enriching. And every time I've come home from doing so, Miranda, my wife, has noticed how charged up and motivated I was, because it just makes me feel so good, because people are so happy to have you and to have a few hours with you and to lose themselves in a book and in talking about it. So it's been a really rich part of my volunteer life, going into prisons.
And you mentioned Miranda, and I want to talk a little bit about support and how much that means, because I always like to read the acknowledgments and who's in the author's life and who they want to thank and why, and Miranda is prominently in there. And you talk about Miranda as an editor and how she enriches everything, because I would think too, as a writer, it's a solitary thing. It is.
It is solitary.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, hopefully before publication, you start to engage with people who can kind of slap you to your senses and help you see that your problems. And of course, I've had terrific help with all of my books, from Iris Tupholme and her team at HarperCollins, but I've also had phenomenal, unflagging assistance from Miranda, who's a writer too, but who, in addition to writing, reads my stuff. I read hers too, and it helps me and tells me where it's weak, and encourages me to make it stronger, and doesn't flinch, even though she's talking to her husband, to tell him when it's not good and when it could be better, and of course I really rely on that, and it's hard, to talk to your spouse about bad writing. Because the question is your primary duty as a spouse, or is your primary duty as an editor? And of course, your primary duty as a spouse is also to be an honest editor, and to provide that person with what they really need, which is to be pushed and cajoled and coached, to a better place on the page. And so I tend to write, very sloppy drafts, and I tend to write with exuberance and speed, and there's a lot of mess and kind of disorganization on the page, and so I need to go back a lot and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. That's a bit of my training as a journalist, because I learned to write very fast, but then to go back and self-edit or to be edited by somebody else. And so Miranda's been just infinitely helpful in helping me find my voice and pushing me to write better, and not to stop until I put my best work on the page.
Was there pressure, Lawrence, after Book of Negroes and the success of it, to get this done, not just in an expeditious manner, but to get it done right and for it to be as good and to have as much of an impact?
There was great pressure. I think most of it came from within. And thank God, even though Iris Tupholme, who runs HarperCollins and who is also my editor, obviously wanted the book very much, she did not want a book that wasn't ready, and she always said, let's wait and make it better and work on it, make it better, and you have one chance to tell this story about this refugee, so tell it right, and if it means you have to go back to the drawing board and rewrite again, so be it. And so I'm very fortunate that that you were so patient, Iris, and I'm really thankful for that. They gave me a chance to write a better book. But yes, for sure I felt pressure. It's hard to follow up a blockbuster, and of course I can't be controlling the successes of a book. All I can do is do my best work on the page, and then the rest is business that I don't really control. And so I try not to be competitive with myself, which is a really dangerous place to go. And I try to just tell myself, well, each thing I do is a piece of my writing heart and soul and brain, and it's part of the mural that is my life's work, and I can love each piece, and other people can decide which pieces they like or more or less, but I don't have to sort of judge myself in that respect, and I can try to enjoy all my work and let it just stand as being different expressions of my own creative soul. And so I try to sort of go there to calm myself when I'm worried about how the book's going to do or how will it be received. But yes, it is hard to follow up, a big success.
You've done well, my friend.
Thank you.
You've done really well. I saw it immediately as a stage play. And I told you, I said I saw it in a kind of August Wilson-y kind of thing. Fences, a la Fences or something, and maybe a Denzel Washington thrown in. But
You like him, do you?
You know.
Yeah. I'll see if I can arrange a meeting.
But I did, and then you had a bit of news for me, and you said, actually, Marci, so
I have sold the film rights to the illegal
already,
and so I
already.
Well, Clement Virgo and Damon D'Oliveira, who Toronto filmmakers who did such a great job with the miniseries, with whom I worked so closely to make the miniseries, have purchased the film rights for the illegal. So I've started working on the screenplay, and I really loved that process of writing with them and creating a sort of a different work of art based on the Book of Negroes, and I'd like to do it again, and so we will. So that's a project to work on over the next few years.
And then maybe theater after?
Well, I have a play in mind, Marci, but that's not the play I've been thinking about.
Think about it, Lawrence.
Okay, I will.
I think it's good.
Okay.
I think it's good. It's good as a play. What is it that you want? And there's so many messages in this, so many messages in the illegal. But what would be the prime one that you want people to take away?
Well, I mean, if we all went into 15 public schools in Toronto tomorrow, and we understood a lot about the children we were meeting in those public schools, we would discover that many of those children in our city, have parents who are undocumented refugees, who are pretty well stateless, and who are not functioning with full ability in this country because they have no papers and they have no right to proceed legally with their lives. And there are millions of refugees in our midst, if "our" refers to Western nations. We've all read about the efforts that President Obama has been making in the South to regularize the situation of refugees in the United States and the hostility that he's encountered trying to do so. So it's hardly news to any of you. And in Canada and France and Australia and the UK.
Hungary.
But I was thinking now of wealthy nations, very, like the wealthiest nations in the world is why I was mentioning those. All of these countries, including Canada, have many undocumented people, and they have a lot of trouble getting on with their lives, and we don't generally recognize them or think about them. They don't really cross our consciousness. And you mentioned at the outset of these remarks that seeing the boy, this Syrian boy who drowned and then washed up on the beach in Turkey, sort of allowed us to really imagine that this could be us or our children. Well, I guess my hope is that the novel will encourage, Canadians and others to sort of take a second look at the humanity of these people that are either here with us already but can't get their lives going, or are trying to get in and are in desperate situations. And I think if we can see and imagine and feel their humanity as being equal to ours, and we're more likely to act like world citizens and act with conscience and step up.
Ivernia in your novels, yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say, Ivernia in the novel says something to that effect when she writes to the immigration minister and says something like, how can humans be illegal? How can we call them this? How can we call them refugees?
Yes, well, she's outraged, as other characters, and so is Viola Hill, the journalist. There are a few characters in the book who are outraged at this language, but the novel is called The Illegal because the government of Freedom State deems people like Kata to be illegal. And of course, you see language like this all over the world. In the States, you very commonly come across the term illegal alien. Then you're not only illegal, but you're interplanetary. Like you're not even human, and you're an alien. And so the language really dehumanizes people. And so it's meant to sort of offer a sense of the chill of what it's like to live in Freedom State in a country with its politics gone amok, which is dedicated to, getting rid of every refugee it can.
It's an outstanding piece of work.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
Thank you, Marci.
At this point, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to open it up to questions. Hello.
Hi, I'm
Hi.
grateful for your honesty behind your writing, like expressing to us today what you put into your writing. Because I love to write, but I'll never be a writer like you are. I just love to write. The one thing that's really caught me though is Book of Negroes, the lead character, how you were, and Marci spoke to it, how you were able to express her feelings and her emotions. I haven't met a man yet that can express what a woman is feeling the way you've expressed it. How do you go there? I don't. When she lost her child, the feeling, the words in that book, I couldn't put the book down because I could feel. And then I had to look back at the cover and realize it's a man, reading the writing. But yeah.
As a man who was dressing as a woman when he wrote the novel. No, seriously, I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that except to say that I've had all sorts of really great women in my life, and they've all had great voices, whether it's my wife, Miranda, or my mother, Donna. I mean, my mom is that character who's writing to politicians. My mom will go to the ballot box and be so disgusted with every person running that she'll rip up her ballot, but she's still going to go to the ballot box and do that because she wants to exercise her democratic right to rip up that ballot. And we had all sorts of people in my family that, mostly women, who'd come visit or that we'd be involved with, who'd take care of us, aunts and older cousins. And so I had a number of very strong, lively, colorful, interesting women, black and white, who were involved in just kind of raising me and making me who I was, in addition to my mom. So I've had all these fantastic women to sort of steer me and guide me as a child and teenager, and I guess I kind of go to those voices when I'm looking to create a character. I go to the voices that I've heard since I was a boy, and I start digging around in there and try to come up with one that is new and that seems real. Other than that, I don't quite know how to do it, except that writing really is about exerting, your moral empathy. Writing is an expression of morality. Writing is a way to try to understand people and write about them lovingly, even if they're doing despicable things. And so you have to sort of tap into an ability to be interested in and engaged by your characters, even if you dislike the things they're doing. You somehow have to try to feel them and make them interesting. So it involves, an ability to listen and imagine and empathize.
That's brilliant, by the way. It's brilliant. It is. Brilliant.
Hi, thank you. I read the Book of Negroes and loved it. I have a question. When the book came out in the States, they changed the title. Now, the Book of Negroes is historical, right? Because you named your book after an actual book that the British had. What did you think about that change? And did you have anything to say about it?
Well, I didn't like the title being changed, but there wasn't a lot to do about it. It was all sort of escalating at the last minute, and I had just a couple days to work with the American publisher to come up with a new title. So I was pretty unhappy about it, but you sort of have to deal with things and move on. Mm-hmm. And life is full of compromises. Even the life of writers is full of compromises, and you don't get to decide everything. And the further away the business is from your own backyard, the less control you have. So a publishing deal in Hungary, you can have a lot less say than a publishing deal in Canada where you live. And so I wasn't happy about it. But the good news is that when the Book of Negroes came out in the States as a miniseries with BET on television, that gave my American publisher, who've been very supportive over the years, Norton, W.W. Norton Company, the moral authority to reissue the novel as the Book of Negroes
Oh, did they?
in the
Great.
States. Because if a black entertainment television could call it the Book of Negroes, so can we. And so around the time that the miniseries came out in January, the American publisher re-released the novel as the Book of Negroes. So now it is back to the original title in the
Great.
States.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, it's a joy to have you. Thank you. Many authors say they know the end of the book when they begin writing it, and they also talk about whether the characters lead them or they lead the character. So I'd like some comment from you about that.
Well, I try to know the ending of my book before I start, but I often change my mind as I'm going. So I'm writing towards something in the beginning, but I don't necessarily know for sure how I'm going to get there. And sometimes change my mind as I go, and usually the changes are, I hope, for the better, and they're kind of inspired by the work that I've been doing. But I can't possibly begin to write a story without thinking I know what the ending is, because I'm writing toward that ending. But things need to stay kind of open and loose and not too scripted. You need to sort of have energy and surprise on the page. So I do surprise myself. As for characters leading me or me leading characters, I can't really tell you honestly that I've had the experience of being led around the page by a character. I wish I could say that were the case, that I was sort of taken over by characters who just dictated how the story would be. But for me, it just sweat, and it doesn't feel that way. I have to create those guys and those women and make them up and try to shape them. And it'd be nice if they sort of took over for me, but I can't really say that I've had that experience, although I wish I could. Certainly be a lot easier if a few of them would take over.
Is change of location important to a writer? Do you need to kind of change the space once in a while?
The space I'm writing in? Mm-hmm. Yes, and I do. I mean, I write mostly at home. For a while I wrote on top of a bookstore in Hamilton. They let me use our favorite bookstore in Miranda's Mind, Brian Prince bookstore in Hamilton. I would have an office on top of the bookstore, but as our children started moving out and going to university, the bedrooms started opening up at home, so I just took over one as an instrument to deflect the possibility of a child returning home. Just turn that bedroom into an office. So we've both done that. But so I write at home, but I also go away sometimes, a couple times a year and write somewhere, wherever I can get to, a friend's cottage or something. Just go somewhere to be alone for 5 or 10 days and write a great deal. And I do go for those writing binges, usually a couple times a year. But mostly I write at home. I like to go away, and I do find it shakes me up in good ways. But sometimes that's not necessarily going away to write, but it might be going away to, say, to be on the film set, with the Book of Negroes in South Africa or something like that. I find that I'm energized by those trips and really want to get back to writing when I'm home. And if it hadn't been for, say, the volunteer work I've done with Crossroads in West Africa and in Swaziland as well, I would never have become the writer that I became, because those experiences just opened me up so much and changed me as a human being. And although I wanted to think that I was going to help give something to Africa, I'm sure Africa's given much more to me by dint of those experiences. And so I'm very grateful for them. And I often encourage young people in high school or university or college to think not just about their next level of studies or about the job that they need to get, but thinking about offering themselves up as volunteers and going somewhere for 6 months or a year. And I generally say that I have yet to meet a person who went off overseas and volunteered who came back saying, I wish I hadn't done that. People generally feel that those experiences have enriched them forever. And so I've been enriched by them forever. So I like to keep supporting Crossroads for that reason.
Tell us just a little bit more, because I was struck by what you said just now, the changes in you as a person. How did those experiences help you to grow?
Well, in so many ways, some of them very intimate and others sort of more politically and socially. When I went to Niger, which is a landlocked, very poor country in West Africa, for the first time with Crossroads in '79, I nearly died, and I developed a gastroenteritis. I probably drank some bad water, and I lost, I went over very skinny, and I lost 25 pounds in about 3 days, and I nearly died, and was in the hospital for a while and needed several blood transfusions and other treatments that were pretty extreme, and I came out of that experience a changed man. For one thing, I lost any vestige of anxiety about my racial origins. I no longer felt consequential. I felt calm and kind of emerging from that near-death experience, rooted in a much calmer sense of who I was, and not worrying any longer beyond that age of 21 or 22 about who I was or how I might be seen or how people might perceive me. It didn't matter. I knew who I was, and I survived this, and I just didn't feel any need to worry about it anymore. So one thing, it was transcendent in terms of my own self-image racially. I just settled into a position of calm in terms of how I saw myself, and that was a really lovely thing to happen out of an illness. But also, I saw African people living in ordinary ways, and I worked with them and stayed in their homes and ate with them, and was helped by them when I was sick, or helped them when they were sick, and saw people, working as bureaucrats in the day and then keeping garden plots at night, to feed their families with food, and even if they were working in the city, they were still growing, subsistence crops to stay alive, and dancing in the breaks in their day the way that we never really do in Canada, and I saw people living in ordinary ways, joyously, even with a tenth or a hundredth of what we have in Canada, and it sort of moved me to feel the energy and the soul and the aspects of community that are so rich in many parts of Africa, and it helped me sort of see beyond the headlines. And understand that we're talking about people when we're talking about crises and famines and war and the like, and so I think it just helped me be in touch more deeply with my own humanity and my own recognition of our shared humanity by traveling, as a volunteer with Crossroads Africa. So it changed me in terms of how I chose to write, because I was really just finding my own way as a writer at the very time that I first started traveling to Africa. So it helped me develop as a writer. It helped shape my fiction. It helped sort of light me up with a sense of passion about the things I'd like to write about and explore. So it really changed me forever.
Yeah, and at peace with who you are. And I love how you said that, and it reminded me of the character John in The Illegal, and something he says where he says, he's not white enough, yet he's not black enough.
Yeah.
So he doesn't feel there's acceptance on either side.
Well, John is a mixed-race character living in a black township, in a place that might be in the South Africa, but it's in Freedom State, and so he's very anxious about how people perceive him, and he doesn't have a father who left, before he got to know him, and his mother's white, so he feels kind of insecure about his own race, and so he's fighting to prove himself and to make himself black, and he's fighting to do that by mounting this film documentary that is just going to save his life. And so he's not just doing a documentary as a school project, he's making a documentary to save his own life and to save his soul, and so he's got a lot invested in this project. And so he's a very ballsy kid. He takes terrible risks. Things we never want to see our kids doing are things that John Falconer's doing to sort of get ahead in this novel.
Any other questions for the lovely Lawrence Hill? Going once, going twice. Do you have one more?
Bernie, I want to know how long it took you to write the Book of Negroes and this book, The Illegal.
How long did it take to write the Book of Negroes and this book, The Illegal? Each one took 5 years, and I seem to be a slow guy. So they each took 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.